The Iranian parliament speaker posted his message while CENTCOM was already pressing execute on Strike Package 3. While Ghalibaf was typing the words, "The era of one-sided deals is over. We told you to keep your word or pay the price," 140 Iranian military targets were simultaneously going dark across the entire coastal architecture of the Islamic Republic. Missile sites, naval assets, ammunition depots, coastal surveillance grids. One by one, systematically lights out. The era of one-sided deals was indeed over, just not in the direction he thought he was announcing when he hit post. And what the United States military executed over 3 consecutive nights, 80 targets, then 90, then 140. While 800 commercial vessels kept moving through an active war zone, and 400 million barrels of crude transited a waterway that Iran had publicly declared closed, is the story that most of the coverage of this conflict is not telling with the analytical depth it demands. Because this is not just a story about strike packages and target counts. This is a story about what happens when an institution mistakes a legal theory for a military position, mistakes rhetoric for deterrence, and mistakes a 60-day commitment it cannot honor for a negotiating strategy. Iran came to the Strait of Hormuz with a toll booth backed by a reinterpreted memorandum. CENTCOM came with 300 joint direct attack munitions and the sequenced air power doctrine that takes years to build and hours to execute. Only one party walked away from that confrontation having achieved its stated objective. And the gap between what Iran declared and what CENTCOM delivered is the most consequential military lesson that any institution in any country watching this conflict needs to absorb before it makes the same category of miscalculation. But let's back all the way up. Because to understand what 3 nights of American air power actually produced, and why the order of events in the 72 hours that preceded Strike Package 3 is the key to understanding everything that followed. You need to understand how Iran got to the moment where it attacked a commercial ship, declared the strait closed, and then watched CENTCOM respond not with a strongly worded statement, but with a targeting list. The trigger event was the Cyprus-flagged container ship GFS Galaxy. The IRGC attacked it in the Strait of Hormuz, set its engine room ablaze, forced the crew to abandon ship, left 1 crew member missing at sea, and then did something that tells you everything about the institutional character of the organization responsible. It provided a justification. The vessel, Iran said, had ignored warnings to follow an approved Iranian route. The IRGC's operational doctrine holds that a commercial vessel transiting an international waterway that does not follow the specific corridor Iranian authorities designated has forfeited its protection from attack. That is not maritime law. That is a mafia toll booth rationalization dressed in navigational language. And it is the same rationalization that the IRGC applied to the Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding, whose language commits Iran to using its best efforts for the safe passage of commercial vessels for 60 days. Iran's parliament speaker quoted that document publicly and used it as justification for continuing to attack ships. The institution signed a commitment not to attack ships, then attacked ships, then cited the commitment it was violating as the legal basis for the violation. In the IRGC's interpretation, escorting a ship through the Strait of Hormuz includes the option to send a Shahed drone through its bridge if it chooses the wrong route. That interpretation is what the 60 days produced. That interpretation is what a single crew member missing at sea represents in human terms. And that interpretation is what Strike Packages 1, 2, and 3 were the answer to. CENTCOM's public response to Iran's declaration that the strait was closed was 3 sentences. Iran does not control the strait. It remains an international waterway. U.S. forces are positioned and prepared to keep it that way. That is the entire public statement. No lengthy diplomatic protest. No strongly worded condemnation of Iranian aggression. No request for emergency UN Security Council sessions. 3 sentences. And then the targeting list was active and the strike packages began executing. Iran made the declaration. CENTCOM made the demonstration. The demonstration involved 80 targets on night 1 and 90 targets on night 2 and 140 targets on night 3, and the cumulative 3-night total of more than 300 Iranian military facilities reduced to rubble, while 800 ships moved through the waterway. Iran said it had closed. That is the demonstration. That is what the gap between the declaration and the reality looks like when one side has the F-15E Strike Eagle and the F-16 CJ Wild Weasel and the F-18 Super Hornet and the F-35 and Tomahawk cruise missiles from Arleigh Burke destroyers and the MQ-9 Reaper and the doctrine to sequence all of them simultaneously across an 800-mile combat radius, and the other side has the Shahed drone and the fast attack boat and the C-802 anti-ship missile and a radar network that has been progressively blinded by every harm missile that has homed on its emissions since this campaign began. Now understand the weapons architecture that executed those 3 nights, because the platform choices and the weapon configurations are not incidental to the story. They are the story. Every decision about which platform carries which weapon against which target category contains, within it, a strategic communication that the target audience, the IRGC commanders watching their installations go dark, is receiving simultaneously with a kinetic effect. The sequencing of each strike package follows a doctrine that has been refined over decades of American air power development and that the Iran campaign has now validated in its fullest operational expression. The F-16 CJ Wild Weasel enters first. Its entire operational existence is built around one mission: finding and destroying Iranian radar systems before the main strike package arrives. The AGM-88, high-speed anti-radiation missile. It carries homes on radar emissions. When an IRGC air defense operator powers up his system to search for incoming threats, the radar's own transmission becomes the homing signal that guides a Mach 2 missile directly to the radar's physical location. The defender's attempt to detect the threat becomes the mechanism of the defense system's destruction. Every radar site that went dark during the 3 consecutive nights of strikes went dark because an Iranian operator made the decision to turn his system on, and the harm was already in the air. The Wild Weasel clears the lane. The F-35 steps through it. The F-35 Lightning II's stealth profile reduces its radar cross-section to a fraction of what any fourth-generation aircraft presents to Iranian air defense systems. It operates inside Iranian threat rings that would force earlier-generation aircraft to either accept significant risk or operate at standoff range. The F-35 does not just survive inside those threat rings. It maps them. Its sensor suite builds a real-time picture of whatever Iranian air defense capability survived the Wild Weasel passes, identifying the remaining threats, characterizing their locations, and feeding that data to the strike package as a whole. The stealth penetrator that enters first does not just destroy targets. It illuminates the threat environment for everything that follows. And what follows is the F-15E Strike Eagle. The F-15E is the workhorse of heavy precision strike in this campaign. 2 seats, 2 engines, a weapons load capacity that makes it the most versatile precision strike platform in the theater. GBU-31 Joint Direct Attack munitions, the 2,000-pound GPS-guided bombs that produce the fireballs in CENTCOM's released target imagery for hardened military infrastructure. GBU-38s at 500 pounds for targets where smaller warhead effects and tighter accuracy are required. The GBU-54 Laser JDAM bridges the gap between the purely GPS-guided and purely laser-guided categories with a dual-mode guidance system that addresses the specific tactical problem of high-threat environments. When a pilot in a high-threat environment needs to perform a defensive maneuver, when a surface-to-air missile forces a threat reaction that takes the aircraft off its attack profile, a purely laser-guided weapon loses guidance if the laser designation breaks contact with the target during the maneuver. The GBU-54 holds its last known laser position when the laser goes off target and continues guiding accurately. The pilot turns the laser off before the threat reaction, executes the defensive maneuver, turns the laser back on, and the weapon has held its guidance geometry throughout. It is the weapon system designed for the specific reality of striking targets in contested airspace, where the threat reaction is not hypothetical. And in the campaign against Iran's coastal military architecture, contested airspace is the operational environment, not the exception. The F-18 Super Hornets, launching from carrier decks in the Arabian Sea, bring the naval aviation dimension that requires no land-basing permissions and no host nation political calculations. The carriers operate where they are positioned. They cycle aircraft at the tempo the strike plan requires. And the F-18 carries AGM-84 Harpoon anti-ship missiles for IRGC naval targets, alongside the precision strike munitions for land installations. The EA-18G Growler variant adds electronic warfare through its ALQ-99 jamming system, degrading Iranian radar and communications networks in the operational area, and creating the electromagnetic environment in which the Wild Weasels harm missiles find their maximum effectiveness. CENTCOM also released imagery of the F-16 loaded with APKWS rocket stations alongside GBU-54s, a weapons configuration that tells you exactly what CENTCOM's ISR picture showed about the Iranian threat that most needed addressing in the drone intercept domain. The Advanced Precision Kill Weapon System rocket costs approximately the same as a Shahed drone. Every Shahed that an F-16 with APKWS rockets shoots down is a cost-neutral engagement for the American side. Iran is spending drone inventory that its severed supply chain cannot replenish. The F-16 is spending a weapon that American production lines manufacture continuously, and that costs roughly $5,000 per engagement. The math of that exchange, compounded across hundreds of intercepts over weeks of operations, is the financial dimension of the degradation campaign that the kinetic imagery does not fully capture. Tomahawk land attack. Missiles from Arleigh Burke-class destroyers add the standoff strike capability that keeps surface combatants beyond the reach of Iran's C-802 anti-ship missiles, while their weapons reach every target on the Iranian coast. 1,000 pounds of warhead, 1,000 miles of range, Flight at 100 feet above the water, below the altitude profile that Iranian radar is optimized to detect. And MQ-9 Reapers dispersed across the operational area provide the persistent surveillance and precision engagement capability that eliminates the time gap between target identification and target engagement for the fast attack boats and drone launchers that the IRGC attempts to reposition between manned aircraft passes. The Reaper can loiter for 24 hours. The IRGC fast attack boat that ducks into a coastal cave between F-18 passes cannot hide from a platform that has been watching the cave entrance since before the boat entered it. This is the strike architecture. Not one platform, not one weapon. An integrated, sequenced, AI-coordinated, multi-domain targeting chain that suppresses, penetrates, strikes, persists, and restores the surveillance picture in a continuous cycle that the IRGC's degraded and progressively blinded air defense network cannot generate a coherent response to. And, across 3 consecutive nights, it executed against a target set that expanded from 80 facilities on night 1 to 90 on night 2 to 140 on night 3, with each successive package broader than the last, because each successive package operated in an air defense environment that the previous package had further degraded. Now look at the specific geography that the 3-night campaign worked through, because the target locations are not random. They are the physical infrastructure of the IRGC's entire Strait of Hormuz threat strategy, worked through systematically, from the most immediately threatening to the most deeply embedded. The JASC naval base is the physical representation of what the IRGC meant when it said it controlled the strait. Radar dishes the size of small buildings, positioned on the Iranian coast with their arrays pointed directly at the choke point through which 1/5 of the world's oil supply transits. Communications towers capable of multi-role function, vessel tracking, drone control, strike coordination, electronic warfare relays, early warning infrastructure, fuel storage, the complete sensor and command architecture of a military force that has spent decades investing everything it has into the specific capability of monitoring, tracking, and threatening commercial vessels in 33 kilometers of navigable water. That architecture, at JASC and at every equivalent installation along Iran's southern coast, is what the 3-night campaign has been systematically eliminating. The radar dishes that tracked the ships, the communications towers that coordinated the drone launches, the fuel storage that sustained the fast attack boats, the headquarters facilities that directed the operations, all of it. And the comparison that has become the definitive analytical measurement of this conflict's actual military balance appears again in the target footage. The United States military releases imagery of Iranian facilities being struck. The IRGC releases imagery of Iranian missiles being launched, not imagery of Iranian missiles hitting their designated targets, imagery of the launches, the departure, not the arrival. Because the arrival, for the overwhelming majority of Iranian ballistic missiles and drones fired at Gulf state cities and American military positions during this conflict, has been an intercept explosion in the airspace above the intended target, rather than an impact at the intended target. The Patriot batteries and the integrated air defense systems of America's Gulf partners have been performing at a rate that the IRGC's launch footage was specifically designed to obscure. Iran shows you the launch because it can document the launch. It cannot document the strike because the strike is not happening at the rate its statements claim. But the mines deserve attention that the immediate kinetic coverage consistently underweights. 80 mines planted in the Strait's navigable waters represent a threat category that no HARM missile and no F-35 can address from altitude. Mines sit in the water and wait. They are indifferent to the air campaign's outcomes. They do not require a radar to illuminate or a communications tower to activate. They are the static threat that persists regardless of how thoroughly the IRGC's active military infrastructure is destroyed, and they represent the hostage that Iran cannot fully ransom, but has not yet fully surrendered. Commercial shipping that would otherwise transit freely is operating under a residual threat condition that mine countermeasure operations must address before full normalization of the pre-conflict transit volumes is achievable. This is the distinction between Iran claiming it has closed the strait and the actual operational picture of the strait. The claim is false, the traffic is moving, 800 ships have transited, 400 million barrels of crude have made it through. But the transit is not occurring at the pre-conflict rate of 110 vessels per day because the mine threat imposes a cautionary overhead on every vessel's routing and timing decisions that the air campaign alone cannot remove. Now step back from the operational details and look at where Iran's negotiating position actually stands after 300 confirmed target destructions, because the strategic picture is the part that gets lost in the coverage of individual strike packages and individual Iranian rhetorical responses. Ghalibaf posted that the era of one-sided deals is over, while Iran was attempting to construct the most one-sided arrangement in the history of international maritime law. A framework under which the Islamic Republic of Iran would collect fees for commercial vessels transiting the Strait of Hormuz, an international waterway that no treaty, No convention and no legal framework in the history of international law has ever recognized as Iranian sovereign territory subject to Iranian toll collection. The Iranian ambassador told the World Peace Forum in Beijing that service fees would absolutely be charged after the 60-day window closed. Iran and Oman presented Washington with a joint fee collection framework. Secretary Rubio rejected it immediately. Trump declared it permanently toll-free. And the military campaign that followed Iran's violation of the MOU is the operational translation of those diplomatic rejections into a language that cannot be misinterpreted through creative textual analysis. Iran's strategic theory of the entire conflict rested on the proposition that control of the strait represented irreplaceable economic leverage that no adversary could afford to physically contest, because the collateral damage to global energy markets would make the military option politically unsustainable in Washington. The theory was not irrational given the historical record of American administrations and their sensitivity to energy market disruption. It was wrong in the specific context of this administration, this military deployment posture, and this level of prior preparation for exactly this confrontation. The theory assumed that the political cost of the air campaign would accumulate faster than the military cost to Iran of absorbing it. 300 targets into the campaign, with the strait open, with 800 ships through, with 400 million barrels delivered, and with Iran's negotiating position described by every serious analyst as structurally broken in a way that looks irreversible, the theory has been empirically refuted by the operational record. The hostage, as the analytical framing goes, is the strait. Iran has the strait, or it thinks it does. But an institution that has lost the combination to its own lock, that signed the Islamabad MOU and then violated it, that declared the strait closed while CENTCOM was demonstrating it was open, that claimed it was hitting 8 bases across the Middle East while its missiles were being intercepted over Gulf state airspace. That institution has been using its hostage while simultaneously reducing its ability to credibly threaten the hostage's continued viability. Every IRGC radar site eliminated is one fewer node in the surveillance architecture that makes strait interdiction operationally effective. Every fast attack boat at the bottom of the Persian Gulf is one fewer instrument available for the next boarding or harassment operation against commercial shipping. Every ammunition depot that went up in flames across the 3-night campaign is ammunition that cannot be loaded onto a drone launcher for the next wave. The hostage is still present. The infrastructure that makes threatening the hostage meaningful is not. There is a global dimension to what Russia's intelligence services did with civilian door cameras that deserves examination alongside the Iran campaign's ISR lessons, because the two reflect the same fundamental insight about modern intelligence collection, operating in unexpected domains. Dutch intelligence agencies exposed a large-scale Russian cyber operation called Laundry Bear. Kremlin-affiliated hackers who compromised civilian internet-connected cameras, doorbell cameras, home security systems, and intercom units positioned along NATO military transport routes in the Netherlands and other European member states. The objective was real-time ground surveillance of weapon systems moving toward Ukraine, not satellites, not drones. A $40 Amazon device on a neighbor's doorbell running factory default passwords with a Russian intelligence operator accessing the live feed remotely. And Dutch intelligence specifically noted that the same basic technique, civilian camera infrastructure repurposed as battlefield ISR nodes, was used by Israeli intelligence and CIA operatives to locate the former Iranian supreme leader before the strikes that opened this conflict. The $40 doorbell is the battlefield sensor of the modern era. The same technology that lets a homeowner check their front door from a smartphone becomes, in the hands of a capable intelligence service, a real-time surveillance node on a military transport route or a target location confirmation system for precision strike. The IRGC's OPSEC problem is not just the harm missile finding its radar. It is every phone camera and doorbell camera and civilian surveillance system in the operational area that a hostile intelligence service with network access can turn into an eye on the battlefield. Now look at where the strategic board actually sits, because the 3-night campaign's most important outcome is not the 300 confirmed targets. It is what those 300 targets reveal about the structural condition of Iran's negotiating position. Iran cannot close the strait. It has mined it, and it can harass it, and it can impose a cautionary overhead on transit routing and insurance pricing. But it cannot close it in the sense of stopping 800 commercial vessels from moving through it, and 400 million barrels of crude from reaching the global market. CENTCOM has demonstrated this empirically and repeatedly. Iran cannot defend its own military infrastructure against the American strike architecture that has been executing against it for weeks. More than 300 targets gone, the coastal radar network progressively blinded, the fast attack boat fleet decimated, the ammunition stores burning, the rail corridor to Russia and China severed, the Chabahar port struck, the oil revenue license revoked, the naval blockade in effect and actively enforced with commercial ships and being turned back from Iranian ports in real time. Iran cannot resupply what the campaign is destroying because every primary resupply channel has been simultaneously closed. And Iran cannot change the domestic political calculation in Washington through the mechanism it has historically relied on, energy market pressure, because the preparatory phase of this campaign ensured that Gulf state alternatives to Strait-dependent routing were deepened, American domestic energy production was strengthened, and OPEC Plus output increases added supply that reduced the marginal strategic value of Iranian production before the shooting started. The IRGC is burning through a finite magazine against hardened targets protected by active integrated air defense systems. Every ballistic missile fired at a Gulf state capital that gets intercepted over that capital's airspace is a missile that cannot be fired again, from a stockpile that cannot be replenished through the severed supply chains that previously fed it, against an air defense network that is learning the IRGC's launch signatures and improving its intercept geometry with every engagement. The finite magazine is getting smaller, the integrated air defense is getting better, the supply chain is cut, the financial system is frozen, the power grid is failing, the bridges are falling, the airports are being struck. The Kurdish insurgency is opening new fronts in the Western Mountains through radar gaps that the air campaign created. And the Qatari diplomats are in Tehran with a piece of paper that says Iran's uranium transfers to American military custody permanently. And the Strait opens completely the moment the signature is on the document. The era of one-sided deals is over, Ghalibaf posted. He was right about that. It is over. The deal that is now on the table is not one-sided in the sense that the IRGC intended to make it. It does not give Iran fee collection authority over the Strait. It does not preserve the nuclear program behind a managed inspection framework. It does not allow the resistance ideology to claim that it negotiated from a position of strength. It gives Iran regime survival in exchange for the permanent, verified American custody transfer of the strategic asset that the resistance ideology was supposed to make untouchable. That is the deal that 300 targets, 4 consecutive waves of strikes, a naval blockade, a severed rail corridor, a destroyed deepwater port, a frozen oil revenue license, a Kurdish insurgency in the Western Mountains, and the most consequential air campaign against Iranian territory in the history of the conflict have produced. The era of one-sided deals is over. What replaced it is sitting in Tehran right now, waiting for a signature, with the full weight of what produced it visible to anyone who has been watching the Strait since the night CENTCOM pressed execute on Strike Package 1. Iran declared the Strait closed. CENTCOM's answer is 300 receipts and 800 ships. And the Strait, whatever Iran claims, is open.